Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming from today. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes for people to arrive, and then we'll get kick-started. So I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are watching. Okay, we'll just wait a couple minutes. So I hope you've all got your materials ready. Don't worry too much if you haven't got all of the materials. The workshop's quite open in terms of using materials around the house, and it's quite flexible. And there'll also be a recording of the workshop sent out afterwards should you miss anything or should you want to revisit any of the workshops. And should you want to revisit any of the stuff Susie's talking about, then that's obviously something you can go back to. Okay, so it's 1 minute past. We'll just give it a moment. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Framing the Everyday with Susie Olczak. Delighted to have Susie Olczak here. My name's Matt G. I'm the subject leader for fine art at Morley College. First of all, I'd just like to extend my thanks to Steph from Marketing and Events and Jeff from the IT department for putting in work to help support with allowing this event to progress and to develop. So the format of what we'll be doing is we'll be having a talk from Susie broken up with little workshops, little chunks of workshops where you can follow as you go along, and also rewatch the recording at the end. Yeah, so we run a HE higher education fine art course at Morley. So today Susie was talking remotely with the students from the HNC, the HND and the BA Top-up in fine art with the students that are normally based at the Chelsea Centre at Morley. And so it basically is like a degree course in the sense that there's 3 separate years, and it's very flexible in the sense that you can revisit the years if you go on a career break or if you come back. And so first of all, I'm just going to welcome Susie Olczak and ask her how it was talking with the students today. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was brilliant talking to them. I spoke to 5 students in the morning, and we spoke a lot about their projects, the things they're working towards, and 2 were working towards their kind of final show, and so we spoke quite a lot about how to think about that, and also opportunities going forwards after graduation, and kind of ways to establish yourself as an artist in the world outside of academia, outside of an institution. And a couple of the students were kind of earlier on in their studies, so we were speaking a lot about their work and the intersections between kind of different disciplines or different subject matter. Yeah, we kind of crossed loads of different themes, like talking about a little bit about post-humanism and digital culture, other things to do with kind of climate, and yeah, it was really great. It was a really exciting morning, and we kind of, yeah, we had lots of really dynamic conversations, so it's brilliant. Well, shall I take it away with the talk? Yeah, brilliant, cool. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and then talk through a few different options for kind of, well, talk you through my work, and then also talk you through the workshops. So in the intersections, we'll be kind of talking about the more practical side of things. So you should be able to see my screen now. Is that all good, Matt? Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, hi, I'm Susie Olczak. Thank you so much for having me to speak today. I'm going to kind of, as Matt said, I'm going to interject with some practical sides to this workshop. So I've framed the talk around those, but just before we go into the first practical workshop, I wanted to just kind of give a bit of an overview of my work as an artist. I'm predominantly based, my studio's in London, but I kind of work on projects all around the country, and I've worked internationally doing residencies and exhibitions, and I also teach and lecture as part of my my kind of creative practice. So all of these things have kind of been as I say, I have my art practice, but then alongside it I have the teaching, and then I also worked quite heavily for a long time in public art, working as a public art consultant, as like an assistant project manager for a company. So all of these things kind of feed into my own art practice, which is really heavily interested in how we experience urban space and how humans behave within urban space, and kind of perception of geometry and light and pattern, predominantly as we're moving through, or as I'm moving through urban space. And I kind of like to frame my work around the word perception, and also the word adaptation, and particularly thinking about ideas of adaptation in the way that we have to adapt as human beings when we go to a new city or a new place, or if we're used to spending time in cities, we have to adapt to rural areas, or vice versa. Thinking increasingly about the idea of how we have to adapt in relation to things like climate change, and I'm very interested in the way that the natural and the elements have a really strong effect on our experience within cities, and also the kind of increasing need to kind of pay quite careful attention to that, and increasing need to almost really kind of carefully consider and design our environments with the natural in mind. I'm also really interested in the way that kind of nature always seems to manage to adapt and always creeps back into urban spaces everywhere around us. And then the final side to adaptation is thinking about the kind of creative way that we adapt as human beings, the way we kind of intuitively build and construct and wrap and package materials, or kind of slot things together, both in the creative world, like the way we would do it as an artist or a designer, but also the way that everyone does it, and as members of the public as well. So a lot of the more recent work I've been working on is very much interested in this, and thinking of particularly as well about the kind of crossovers between different disciplines. So I work predominantly as a sculptor, but increasingly I work two-dimensionally as well, and my sculptures often involve quite a lot of different materials and processes, and kind of sit between different disciplines. So I, as you'll see through the demonstrations, and I'll talk about it a bit more with the practical, but I take photographs and I print and I make sculptures, and they kind of all intersect with each other, and kind of I kind of adapt the processes for the different mediums. So hopefully this talk today and the workshops is a bit of a journey through some of those processes and the mediums, but it could also be a kind of cyclical journey. It's not necessarily got a start and an end, and again I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Like some of the processes can kind of be like cyclical. I can do one and then it becomes something else, and then I take it apart and it becomes something else. So this first sculpture here is very much a kind of end result of quite a lot of quite playful experimentation in the studio. It's reusing a found object. It's reusing an old pen grid from from a shop, from storage. You know, those kind of containers that you slot pens into in order to choose your color or whatever in an art shop. And someone gave it to me about 7 years ago, because they knew I'd like it, because they knew I really liked geometry, and they knew at the time as well I was doing quite a lot of research into grids, and I'm very interested in the way that grids are used both in the urban spaces we spend time in, but also in our digital world, and how we kind of navigate a lot of the world, whether it's in real life or online, based around a kind of grid system. And yeah, so I kind of reconfigured this grid using tape and using paint and spray paint, and yeah, this sculpture emerged as a result. And again, I'm kind of, as I said earlier, like really interested in this use of slotting as a way of making work. So that's something we'll have a go at later. We'll be slotting a sculpture together. And yeah, just before we go into the first practical, so as I mentioned earlier, I work a lot two-dimensionally, and increasingly I work a lot three-dimensionally, but increasingly two-dimensional work has become really important. And I see the two-dimensional works as being works in their own right, but also as being ways in which to work out sculptural works or to work out installations. And someone quite recently in a conversation I was having was talking about this idea of like some of the collages or the two-dimensional works being a little bit like what it would be like to squash one of my sculptures. And I thought it was quite interesting way of thinking about it. One of the students today said that they reminded him very much of a stained glass window, and I've not heard that before, but I need to think about that more. But windows and framing, like the way that we frame the world, has always been really interested, like a really kind of interesting thing for me as well. And it kind of goes back into these ideas of perception and how we perceive the world as we're moving through it. So increasingly framing and kind of the way that we kind of can piece together experiences of the world from lots and lots of fragments of different experiences, and the way that as we're moving through particularly more kind of densely populated urban space, there's kind of a lot of different things that are jarring against each other in what I perceive as quite a beautiful way. So my sculptural work and my two-dimensional work is kind of trying to give a sense of that. And there's on the right, this sculpture, quite a lot of in both my two-dimensional and my three-dimensional work, transparencies come in a lot as well. So I quite often try to work with materials that kind of have layers of transparencies in them, so you're starting to see the other materials through the different layers, but also the world around the sculptures through them as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit further on as well, and when we're doing some of the two-dimensional work, I'll kind of talk about that a bit more. I think that that leads us on to the first practical, which is I'll stop sharing the screen. So I was going to do just a quick collage to begin with, and just talk you through some of the things in relation to that. So hopefully you can all see the table now. So yeah, the first thing with the collage, I always obviously start with a background. It's usually white, doesn't have to be, but it mostly I end up working with white paper, and kind of usually relatively thick kind of art paper. So I don't know if anyone's planning on following live or doing it at home, but yeah, it's kind of the thicker the better, and the bigger the works are. So sometimes I've been doing kind of A0 or bigger works recently. The kind of stiffer the paper needs to be in order just to kind of keep the keep the quality nice and to not end up kind of marking it at any point. And then I kind of collect things, as I say, I kind of collect things from experiences of life, really. So the collages are usually a combination of photographs that I'll take around different spaces. So this was last year, I was doing a residency in Hoxton, so I spent a lot of time photographing the local area. And then I was lucky enough in the summer to be able to do a residency in Somerset in a garden called Hestercombe, and I spent a lot of time whilst I was there documenting the elements in the garden. So the water, there's a lot of water in that garden, so I documented a lot of that, and also the plants, like thinking about a kind of micro and macro and the details within a plant. So I always kind of start with photographs, and then I often also use old prints as well. So parts of prints that I'll make, which you'll see in the next demonstration, monoprints or other kinds of prints, bits of cut up screen prints that I've done, or also liner cuts as well. And then also sometimes kind of include drawings that I cut up as well, so bits of drawing or painting. So that's an example of a painting that I did during lockdown, and some drawings, and then yeah, kind of then just start to cut up and piece together and start to work out compositions that way. So I'm just going to do a really quick one today. I don't know if anyone wants to follow along at the same time. And in terms of shapes and compositions, I tend to start with things that are quite like geometry is really key in my work. So I tend to start with the geometric and then start to think about how I can kind of adapt that slightly. So taking a really geometric form and then kind of putting in something slightly more organic. And then increasingly these collages have kind of got more and more nature in them, and I think that's kind of increasingly starting to kind of add more of the organic in there. I think at the start they were very angular, as I'll show you a bit later, but now they're increasingly starting to kind of grow as the organic world does. So yeah, it's kind of like see what I've got, collect everything, and then from there start to think about different compositions. And what's quite nice with this is you can't really, I don't feel like you can really go wrong. The worst thing that can happen is when you're making, you know, I don't always stick things down initially, but the worst thing that can really happen is you put too much on, and then it's just a case of getting a new piece of white paper or different colour. It doesn't have to be white, it could be any colour. Getting a new piece and cutting it all out again and reconfiguring it. So again, it comes back to this idea of adaptation, and these kind of creative decisions that you make can be reconfigured too, which is quite nice. So anyway, I'll do a bit more cutting. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's following along this in terms of things you might have at home. If you haven't got photographs, you might have hopefully some magazine cuttings. This could be done. I've done this almost predominantly with just coloured paper. I've done it with just newspaper as well, so it's quite versatile in terms of material. And then obviously you've seen me use scissors, Pritt stick, super simple. And then I usually also use some coloured tape on top as well. Again, you don't really have to. This is like something that I really enjoy using for various reasons and enjoy the colour. But you could, I mean, sellotape I guess would work, or you could just avoid tape and just kind of stick the composition as well. So when I've kind of started to get some pieces together, I kind of start thinking about different compositions. And this is where I think the sculptural side of things comes in, because almost like thinking about how I would build this sculpture, or like how would it be constructed in space. And I quite often look back into architectural examples for inspiration as to how things are built, but also thinking about them from this viewpoint as being a bit like a map. So thinking about how I might navigate through the space, and yeah, it becomes quite intuitive. Just kind of play around for a while, but most of the time I just kind of start sticking and then kind of go from there, really, piece by piece, rather than kind of worrying too much about the composition beforehand. Just kind of begin to build it up, piece together. And it's quite important to decide quite early on what configuration you want to have it in, because obviously you can be building it one way and it might not work the other. But also, I also kind of check that sometimes. So if it's not working in a particular format, I kind of think about putting it upside down or thinking about it in another way, because they are abstract. So, you know, even with the kind of more representational aspects, they can still be quite fun if they start to kind of have a different, if you have a plant that looks like it's growing but it's going upside down, it can be quite fun to like subvert and play with the surreal nature within the work as well. So I'm just going to do a really quick one today, just so that we can kind of move on to the next process, just to give you an idea. But some of these take, some of these are quite quick, and some of these take kind of days and or longer. Like sometimes I'll kind of keep coming back to this and kind of keep reconfiguring until I'm happy. But some can be quite quick. It really kind of depends on the I guess the energy level I have at the time, and also the like the amount of layers. Like you can kind of keep building up and up and up, and especially with like papers that have slightly different transparencies on them, you can start to then think about what happens if you place an extra layer over the top and start to get that kind of double, like, I don't know if you guys can see, but start to then get the image behind, which can be quite fun. So I'll just add a few more on. And it's been quite nice during lockdown, because I've just been able to kind of almost like create my own materials in lots of ways. And just apart from the printing of the photographs, which I did online and got sent, everything else is kind of I'm just kind of printing my own materials really here, or like using the tape that I can get delivered. So it's all kind of quite good for things that are accessible from home. I'm gonna add a little bit of tape. I have to check myself, because sometimes I go a bit mad with the tape. I realise I have to tone down the tape use. And I sometimes play around as well with the difference between having bits of tape that are torn edges, or having the more precise cuts, and just kind of experiment a little bit with that. Let's give it one last bit on, and then we'll go back to the talk. Okay, so just gives a little bit of a sense. I won't spend too long on the collage, because I want to kind of spend a bit longer later on the sculpture works, but kind of gives a little bit of a sense of how one of them might begin to be built up. So I'm going to share the screen again. So hopefully you guys can see this again. So the collage works and the 2D works, I'm just going to come a bit closer, really started during I was doing a master's at the Royal College a couple of years ago. So I graduated the summer before last, and they really started with just this kind of experiments of how to start thinking about different viewpoints within architecture. And because I was living in London and traveling through central London every day, I was really kind of constantly experiencing that city. And there's kind of some really interesting points in particular. There's a particular building right near London Bridge that when you look up, you get this really interesting kind of framing of the sky above. And I was kind of very inspired by that, and also really inspired by the actual building that the Royal College was in Kensington, which is kind of, I think people thought this was quite strange because it's really not the most attractive building in the world, and it looks out onto the Royal Albert Hall and the Albert Memorial. So in terms of probably architectural structures, it looks out onto much ostensibly much more interesting structures. But I spent a lot of time looking up into the Royal College ceiling, and outside I was lucky enough to have a studio space in the first year that had this really great view out into the park. And I was really interested in the way that the natural was framed by that window and by the spaces that we had to kind of move through in the Royal College. So I started to document these bits with the fluorescent lights are actually the Royal College ceiling, and I started to document a lot of the space around and began to piece it together with other examples of architecture. So this was kind of initial work where I was using found imagery from different archives or from National Geographic magazines, and now I pretty much only, like, I don't really use any other found images. I only use my own photographs and my own prints. But at the time I was beginning to use bits from magazines and architectural journals as well. And that was I think a really good starting point of these works. And then I was also thinking a lot about in London in particular, well, in any city, but I've noticed it most in London. You get this kind of layering of cities, especially on billboards where the billboards have been taken away, or on the tube. You kind of get the peeling away of advertisements and the peeling away of different kind of layers of history within the city. So I was kind of starting to try to bring a sense of that into my work in general, and it very much began with these collages, and it's something that's kind of increased. I've always been interested in rust and kind of changes of materials to give a sense of time or passing time or histories, but this was kind of this initial starting point to try to get things to begin to look like they were peeling away from these layers. And then just before COVID hit, I was lucky enough to do a residency at Sandpoint Gallery in Hoxton. It was a 6-week residency with 2 other artists. Basically the space has a print studio, and it has a ceramics studio, actually 2 print studios and ceramics. And we were really fortunate that as part of the residency, we were able to access the facilities and to talk to the resident artist who had been working there for many years, and to get some advice. And so I was working a lot on ceramics when I was there, and building these sculptures that were kind of almost looked like they were folds on top of folds on top of folds, and kind of sat somewhere between being built and collapsing. And then alongside that, I was working on these print. Well, I was creating collages, and then it was actually like a really happy accident. I accidentally thought that one of the collages was just a blank piece of paper, and went and did a monoprint on the back of it, not realizing it had a collage on the other side, and then realized that actually this was really, really effective. So it's kind of that classic case of, happy accident, but being able to make that judgment call that was a good thing. And so over the course of the few weeks in the lead up to our show in this space as part of the residency, I was just kind of printing a lot and working on ceramics at the same time, and it worked really well because when the ceramics were drying, I could be working on the prints and vice versa, and just kind of producing as many of these works as possible, and going out into the space and taking photographs of the surrounding area in Hoxton, of the buildings and spaces, bringing it back, printing it, making them into collages, and then printing on top of them. So this is kind of I guess the extension of this idea of printing on top happened during this residency, and it's been something that I've been doing a lot during COVID, because I've not been able to access my studio as I would normally, so I've been doing it a lot from home, is creating these collages, and sometimes they exist as collages in their own right, and then other times they become prints over the top. So this is my little home studio. Yeah, so over the course of the nearly a year now, I've been kind of not been able to get to the studio without traveling, so I've been working from home a lot, and yeah, kind of thinking about these collages more and more, and playing around with different scales, and then yeah, doing the prints on top, onto layers, and then again sometimes then they get cut up and put back into collages. Sometimes they exist as prints. So it's again this kind of cyclical nature within the work. And yeah, increasingly beginning to bring plants in more and more, and think about the kind of domestication of nature, in the way that, as I said earlier, plants are kind of always present within our city spaces, and even the most built up environments, they kind of creep back into the structures, or they're within the landscape, but also they're so important to us in our houses and in our domestic space as well. And I lived in Shoreditch for a little bit of time before COVID, and I was always kind of fascinated on the Sunday how many people would be going to Columbia Road and kind of walking back with these gigantic plants. And whenever you move through the city, you always see these house plants that kind of jammed right up against people's windows, and you kind of get a sense of their interior space through their plants. So I kind of during lockdown, maybe like all of us, have become quite attached to my houseplants too. And so yeah, these collages have started to kind of take on a slightly less abstract form, and begin to grow within the works. And so this one is a combination of linoprint and monoprint as well, and obviously you've got the tape as well in it. But then also continuing also to develop them in a more abstract way, and thinking about them as being these kind of like potential future plans for what an architectural space might look like, and increasingly beginning to use kind of bits of packaging, or bits of kind of other processes in the prints as well. So these parts here are from discarded like laser cut offcuts from other processes from sculpture, and so I've begun to kind of start printing with those. So again, we've kind of got a cyclical nature of things from different processes starting to creep into the work. And here another example, the kind of more abstract architecture one. So this was this is kind of involving screen print and then monoprinting on top of screen. I think that brings us on to our next practical, which is the monoprinting. So hopefully you guys can see the next bit. I'm going to keep that to one side. So for the monoprinting side of things, or the kind of, well, the printing in general from home, I was accessing a screen printing studio in between the lockdowns when it was accessible, but I haven't been able to access that again now during the lockdown. So again, I've kind of there's kind of two things that are possible, I guess, from home. You can create your own, or you can buy your own screen and still expose the screen to the ultraviolet light, just using sunlight, and kind of, or create stencils or paint on stencils. So there's still possibilities of doing screen printing from home, but the kind of mostly what I've been doing is doing lino cuts to create the plant leaves. So things like this one would be a lino cut onto tracing paper, and another example of kind of lino cut. So I'm not going to show that today, but lino cut's great. You kind of get your rubber and you draw your shape on, and then you carve out your design. And I've been doing that quite a lot, as I say, for the plant prints that I've been doing. But then also doing monoprinting as often as possible, really. So for monoprinting, there's different ways you can do it. You could do it using a bit of polystyrene. I've seen people do it before with the back of pizza. You know, you get the kind of polystyrene casing for your pizza. So they kind of discard that and then engrave into the pizza and then use that to print on the top. But I quite like doing it on bits of, I've just got two different sizes of plastic. I'm just going to use a small one today, just really thin plastic that you can get online or from just any art store. And then the other things you need are some printing ink, so just kind of standard lino or block printing ink, and just a roller. So it's really simple in terms of the amount of materials and where you can get them from. And yeah, just kind of, it's not going to come out, it's going to be stuck. So I normally do this on my kitchen floor because it's the only place in the flat with no carpet. So I'm going to have to be, try not to destroy my carpet. But yeah, if you don't need much space, I guess, in terms of the space. The hardest thing is kind of, it's not going to come out now. Just making sure you've got enough space to let the prints dry afterwards. I have seen people do it outside before, but it kind of, obviously if it's windy or if it's not really nice weather, you don't want to do it outside a bit more. So just making sure there's somewhere for you to leave your prints for kind of a while to kind of dry. It takes a couple of hours to dry. So yeah, that's kind of key. Yeah, just get your ink, and it's quite important to make sure that you're rolling it relatively evenly. Just kind of getting a good, I don't know if you can see, getting a good layer of the ink. And it's quite useful having two bits of plastic, so you've got somewhere to roll out, but you don't have to roll on the plastic. You could roll on another surface. It is quite good on the plastic, but it could be anything, any kind of other flat surface. And then just making sure there's like an relatively even coverage. I'm not too fussy about, you know, I'm sure there's printmakers who are kind of really fussy about how even it is. I quite like the slightly experimental side of things, to be honest. Yeah. So yeah, get it relatively even, and then there's kind of two options for the next step. I'm going to talk through both. So there's the option of putting the paper on directly onto the top, and then scratching. So you can use anything. You can use a pencil. You can use I'm using a fork. You can use your fingernail, whatever you want, and just kind of like scratching into the back of the print. This works, I think, quite well with the pencil, but anything you want to do. And this is quite good if you want to do like a really accurate design. So say you had, you know, something more realistic that you wanted to create, you could then have your image on tracing paper on top and be kind of tracing around it. For my kind of more abstract ones, it doesn't matter, I guess, so much, but it's just about kind of making sure you get the right pressure and kind of beginning to scratch away. I'm just going to do this really quick one because I'm going to show you the way I do it mostly, which is the other way. So this one just gives you an idea of kind of, you end up with you know, quite dark where you've scratched away and lighter in the rest. So that's option 1. And then I'll just show you quickly option 2 as well. And then obviously in between each one, you don't have to always put fresh ink, but it's obviously, if you don't, you're going to get a lighter print every time. So it's kind of usually best. And then I, again with the fork, or sometimes use just a bit of cardboard. The other option is to actually scratch directly onto the plate. I don't know what I'm going to do, just some sort of growing plant-like thing. And this is the kind of the way, sorry, you can't see that well, the way that I do it mostly. I find I prefer to kind of be direct onto the plate. Just going to add a little bit in. And then again, it's just about kind of taking there. And then, yeah, so I haven't used too much ink, but so it's not too dark, but you kind of start to get a sense of what that one's like. And I'm just going to do one last one. So I want to just show you the printing on top of the collage as well. My fork this time. So yeah, just kind of generally, I've always been really into mark making and thinking about kind of the gestural within art. So quite like, again, this bit of the process can take a lot longer. Just doing it quite quickly to give you guys a sense. Give it an idea. And then when it goes onto the collage, ideally, most of the time I do a plate that's as big as the collage, but just for today's purpose, I'm just going to kind of just put it onto a section. But you can also build up this, you know, you could print, let it dry, print another layer, keep going really. And you can, again, do this 2 ways. You can do it with the collage down so you can see where you're putting, or sometimes if I'm just being quite experimental and quite playful, I'll kind of put the collage over the top of the print the other way around, so it's less kind of controlled, I guess, where it's going to be. I never really know what these ones are going to turn out like, so it's quite fun just to experiment, and if it goes wrong, I just cut it up and put it into another work, or kind of yeah, reconfigure it again. I don't know what it's going to be like. Okay. So yeah, so I'm quite happy with, I don't know if you can see that one. And yeah, so I'm kind of, yeah, quite pleased with that. I'd probably think about maybe putting another layer on, framing it in a particular way, or kind of maybe even cutting it out and reconfiguring it that way. So yeah, that gives you an idea. I'm just going to move this out of the way for the last bit of the talk. Okay, let's share my screen once more and talk you through the sculptural aspects of the work too. So, 1 second. So hopefully you guys can see the screen again. The last bit of the talk is the kind of main, I guess I'm going to talk you through quite a few different works, sculptural works, and then we've got one more little practical at the end, thinking around sculpture and this kind of assemblages or collages within sculpture. So as I said earlier, let's go a bit closer to my computer. The kind of central part of my practice is sculptural, and the two-dimensional work has kind of always been there. I've always worked in photography and had photographic elements, either through using it as part of documentation of work or actually as part of works themselves. So this work on the left is a work that I showed for my undergrad degree show in 2010 at the Glasgow School of Art, and obviously it's a sculptural piece, but the photograph in the backdrop was really important in tying the two sculptural works together, and also tying in the space, the architecture around, and also the people viewing the work. And this photograph was taken from another sculpture that wasn't in the degree show. It was taken from the surface of that sculpture, and I'd kind of scratched into perspex and then took these photographs from that surface. So photography's always been there, and the two-dimension has always been there, but kind of in slightly different ways to how it is now with the collage. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk, I guess, we haven't got so long, but do like a whiz through of the journey basically from undergrad right up to kind of now, just choosing a few select pieces. So I know that quite a lot of you are students, and so I thought it might be kind of quite useful to see that journey through the works and through two different institutions and things like that. So yeah, as I say, this is my degree show work from Glasgow. I was really keen on making sure that it had a home afterwards, and not just making work that had to, because at art school it's often you make work and it's kind of you throw it away afterwards, you document it, you throw it away, and I really wanted to make sure this work could have a home. So I made it so that it could be an outdoor work as well as being an indoor work for the show. So it's jesmonite. It's kind of like a type of plaster that you can put different pigments in, and it's kind of mocked up to look like concrete, and obviously there's an illusion in the balance of it. It's got quite a lot of, it's got more of an illusion to it than maybe it looks like quite a minimal piece, and it is quite a minimal piece. There's quite a lot of structural things within it. It's got like a metal framework within, it's got polystyrene at the top to make sure it's really light so it can have the lean without being unsafe, and then it's got lead and concrete in the base to give it its counterweight. So yeah, it's kind of playing around with these works and creating these kind of walkways where people had to walk through within the space, and thinking about trying to kind of make the viewer in quite a playful way feel a little bit uncomfortable in both the fact that this piece is quite it's precarious and it's quite heavy, so you're kind of scared of it in a way, but also equally is kind of scared of your effect on it. Like it could knock you over, but you could also knock it over. So I quite like making these works so they're quite human height, or just slightly above human height. So they're not architectural in scale, but they kind of have obviously a relationship with the architecture around them. So yeah, and then that went on to live in a private garden afterwards. So I guess I kind of got my wish in it not being destroyed straight after degree show. And that led on to a work that I made for a project at the Institute of Astronomy in Cambridge with a public art consultancy, Future City, who I ended up working for in the end as a project assistant. And this was kind of the initial stages of my interest in public art, and it kind of helped to consolidate my research into architecture and architectural space. And this was for a one-day event called Ways of Seeing, and I was asked to produce a piece of work for this front lawn, and I became really fascinated by both the way that astronomers, you know, everything. Astronomy is all about perception, and it's all about framing, and it's all about looking through a very fixed viewpoint. And I so wanted to create a work that represented that, but also was very much tied to the location. So I wanted the work to kind of frame the architecture behind, but also have this element of illusion. So as the viewer walks through the space and round, it breaks up the form, and they kind of get a different sculpture from every viewpoint in some ways. And again, this work, a little bit like the Jesmonite piece before, has an element of illusion in it. It's polystyrene only this time because it was a one-day event. I didn't want to kind of make anything too heavy, but it's got like a render on the front surface to kind of make it look like it is stone. And yeah, it was a fun project. It was great to see people interact, and it was really great to kind of talk to the astronomers and see their reaction, and kind of engage with that world and a different discipline that's equally kind of, or you know, even more interested in perception than I am in so many ways. And then a couple of other early projects right after graduation. So I think I was talking to one of the students today, actually. They asked about that initial point when you first graduate and how to kind of navigate it. And I had these two early projects quite early in after graduating in my career, where I was asked to do, well, the first one on the left was from Glasgow, we kind of clubbed together and organised to come down to London as a group of students after our degree show to put on a show, which was really great. And it was really good to have that opportunity afterwards and to have something to look forward to. But it was also quite daunting because we were making work in the town hall in Shoreditch, and it was like underneath the town hall is this amazing cavernous space, and it's really incredible, but they're quite big spaces to fill. And at the time I didn't have any studio space. I was back at home for the summer at my parents, and I had to kind of think of the way to make some work and kind of fill the space as much as possible, but using as minimal materials as possible, which again is kind of a reoccurring theme in my work. So I ended up using electroluminescent wiring, which is like just like an LED strip light, but it doesn't have any single bulbs within it. So it's a continuous light. And this was a really great way to start to use the space and use light in a space in quite a kind of quite a simple way in terms of technology, but quite an effective way in terms of amount of material. And then I also quite recently, after kind of just after graduation, I'd done a glow stick installation at Glasgow when we had to do an installation module, and I'd used glow sticks to create this installation in one of the corridor spaces in the art school, that kind of used light to make the space look like it was getting narrower and like not as high, and also splitting into two to kind of alter the viewer's perception within the space. And glow sticks were really cool, but it was kind of annoying, so I had to reinstall this installation every day. But yeah, totally a great material to use in terms of first kind of getting into using light. But then in the summer after graduation, I got someone saw this. I spent a lot of time putting work online because I didn't have a studio space at this point. I kind of focused on just kind of getting the work that I had made out as much as possible publicly. And someone, well, the curator from Saatchi, Rebecca Wilson, saw that work on a website and asked if I could remake it for, they were doing like an art trail at the Big Chill Festival with a couple of, well, about 10 artists. So Oliver Beer showed, and a few, I can't remember everyone else's names, but a few other artists showed kind of projection works, and they wanted me to create this glow stick work again. Although obviously I couldn't do it in glow sticks, I had to use another type of material. So this was kind of your first experience of beginning to use electricity outside and to create a public work that, although it was a temporary work, it had to withstand the different weather conditions during the course of a festival. And I guess most importantly, it also had to withstand the traffic and the amount of people, you know, the amount of people that go to a festival and are spending time in this space. It had to be quite robust and working that way. And the budget was like the best budget I'd had at that point in my career, but it wasn't a huge budget, so I kind of had to be quite careful with how to manage the money. And I was actually really fortunate in I ended up realizing I couldn't do it on my own. I didn't have the experience at this stage to do it without assistance, so I kind of thought about who might be a good person to try and get in touch with, and realized that probably the best person or type of person would be someone who already did festival lighting. And I contacted a company and they were really supportive, and realized that my budget was quite low, and actually gave this came up with a solution where they helped me to install this work and to kind of plug it all in and get it into the generator. And then the deal was that I took the work down myself, because that was obviously the less kind of serious part of it. And then they came and collected the light. So it was a really great way of working out how to navigate a project. Kind of early on, I was very fortunate to be able to have that from that company, that generosity. But it kind of taught me a really important lesson in being able to make things happen and just kind of find a way around, even if sometimes they seem impossible at the start. And then just included these works because I kind of, for quite a long time, didn't have access to studios, or didn't have continuous access to studios. And I kind of find even now that because I work in a range of materials and processes, it's not always possible to have access to all the kinds of machinery and processes I'd like to. So I've kind of found ways around that as well. So one of the ways, again, I spoke about it earlier with one of the students, was I was lucky enough to get accepted onto an artist access to art school residency, which is a national program of residencies where you can apply as an artist, and you can basically get access back into institutions and use their facilities with some sort of reciprocal arrangement. So my arrangement was to do some tutorials and some crits and an artist talk for the students. And that was really great because I got access back into using facilities and using like the laser cutter and using the print studio and using the sculpture studios as well. And it's something that any of you guys who are students out there, do use your facilities when you can get in and use them outside of kind of COVID times. Like, do make the most of them, because it's so much harder when you're trying to access them as a professional. So that was one opportunity. And then I was lucky enough to then also do a residency more recently in a sculpture engineering firm called Benson Sedgwick, and this is where I made these two works using water jet cuts, so like a machine that cuts the metal using CAD, using computer software, and then they let me kind of use a scrap metal so I was able to kind of get these two bits of bronze in the middle as well, which is really great. And at this point I was really interested in the way that light kind of flickers through different surfaces as we're moving through urban space. So like as you're moving past railings, or I guess probably a more significant optical effect that I'd noticed was when you're driving on motorways in the UK, there's always this kind of, the overpasses have this perforated metal on them, and at times with certain lighting conditions it creates this kind of moire effect, this optical illusion. So I wanted to create these two sculptures that could be standalone pieces that work with the lighting in the space, but also they can overlap, and when they overlap they start to create that optical illusion. So these two sculptures do that, and also again these are kind of quite small scale. They're like 40 centimeters by like half a meter. They're not big works, but I wanted them to kind of have the potential to be scaled up, or to kind of be, they could be more, they're like maquettes for works that could be more in relation to kind of human height. And then just a couple of other works involving metal structures and lighting. So this was a work that I created for, it was a little bit mad actually. Again, it was like a one-day event for a college in Cambridge. I was asked to do a project, and the brief was really open. I could kind of make what I wanted to, and I proposed to make these structures that were a bit like, they're to do with rotating or spinning, or kind of like how a ball might roll. Again, going back to these ideas of movement and moving through space, and they kind of have two lighting fixtures in every piece, and then there's a sensor just before the trees, which is triggered by anyone moving past. So as one person moves past, it triggers the lights, and they kind of flicker on each structure one light at a time, which gives the effect of them rolling in the space. Again, a bit of a logistical nightmare. So I kind of often make things, I've stopped making things so often for like just one-day events, because it's just so much work for that one day. But if I am doing something for a short time, I try to make it in a way that can then have it can have different like lifetime, like it can be shown in different ways afterwards, and that you know, it can live on. So these structures are flat pack, so they can go into like a normal size van, but they can also be kind of stored in my studio quite easily, which kind of added a bit of technical difficulty in terms of the actual fabrication of the works, and especially with the wiring and the lighting. But I definitely think it was worth it, because this work went on to, after the one-day event that it was commissioned for, it went on to kind of have an outing in a London show, and then it was in a sculpture garden for a season as well as summer. So yeah, again, a kind of good lesson in finding ways to make things happen, but also thinking about the longevity of things afterwards. And I kind of more often nowadays work in the kind of materials that we'll be doing with the last workshop today, and kind of paper and card, and unless I know things are going to have a like long-term home, and then I'll use steel or glass or concrete, or materials that kind of are less easily reconfigured. But kind of, I guess that's been a shift in the work. And then yeah, now we're kind of I'm at the Royal College, so this was a couple of years ago. Again, experimenting with different processes and materials and structures. and starting to get a bit more experimental, I think, with the material use. So thinking about, I'd use neon a lot, like in the last work, but starting to think about how it could relate to other materials. So submerging it into water and having a colour change in the, so I wanted the neon bends itself, but it also changes colour as it hits the water. So I wanted to kind of, again, create this illusion where the viewer's not sure if the water's the thing bending the structure and changing the colour, or if it's within the material itself. And then with this work, starting to think more and more about this idea of the model, or things being at different scales, a bit like the work I mentioned earlier with the water jet cut steel, having that potential to be scaled up. Now thinking about making something that's bigger and the kind of more human scale, or slightly bigger than human scale, but that still looks like a model. So by leaving kind of panels that were missing, it kind of frames the space around it, but also gives that sense of it being still in construction, or kind of still being that kind of maquette or model, but just a lot larger. I also kind of left the marking, some of the writing on the panels in the work, and I guess this was a bit of a beginning of, you'll see, like, my style loosened up quite a lot during the Royal College and became even kind of a lot more playful and a lot less kind of obsessional in the material treatment and the finishes, and I guess this was a good starting point for that happening. And yeah, I think the Royal College was really important in that process, because I just had like 3 or 4 tutorials that were really quite defining in that sense. They kind of, I think one tutor said that I was still making the same work as when I came in, which I obviously didn't want during an MA. Someone else said that I needed to have a bit more of the unexpected in my work. And another tutor just told me to start kind of being more playful and using all the materials in my space, and just kind of almost like taking the pressure off. Because I think when you're doing a course, it's really easy to feel that pressure, and that almost kind of stops you being creative. So that any kind of strategy that makes you be more experimental or playful, again, I think it's really useful, and it's definitely something that's come into my work more and meant as a result I have a lot more fun making work. So it's quite nice knowing that if I want to, I can do the more structural or the more resolved or kind of refined works, but then I can also experiment and be playful in between or instead. So yeah, again, for anyone who's getting into being creative or being, studying, take risks and be experimental and be playful and have fun with what you're making. I think it's really important. And then I also did this light work as well relatively recently. So again, using neon and experimenting with thinking about neon in relation to water, but this time having it in proximity to a river in a city space, and kind of encouraging a little bit like I like to frame the world around for the viewer. I also really like to encourage the viewer to take on, kind of take a moment and take a break and kind of reflect and be quite spiritual and quite in the moment especially within cities, and especially within kind of thoroughfares within cities or places where it's very transitory. So this work was very much about that, and I made it in collaboration with Sue Shepherd, and I speak quite a lot about this work on the podcast that we did recently for Morley College. So I'm not going to talk too much about it now, because I guess it's quite a good chance to plug Matt's new podcast and Morley College's podcast, which I'm sure they can send you the link to if you don't already know. So I'm going to move on. Whilst I was at Royal College, this interest in water increased, and as I said earlier, I'm really interested in our relationship with the elements, in particular how they affect our urban space. And I was lucky enough to get a research grant to go to Iceland to spend 10 days driving around Iceland on my own, exploring, particularly going to sites where ice or water was really present, or kind of really important, really significant in different locations. So I went to see Ronnie Horn's Library of Water, which is a sculptural installation where she's created these perspex cylinders that house water from all the different glaciers around Iceland. And then I spent a lot of time going to the natural sites and the waterfalls, and also thinking about geology. I climbed a volcano and spent quite a lot of time with the views from that volcano, and also thinking about the materials, the ground, the earth as well. But the most significant part of that trip for me was going to the Diamond Beach in the south of Iceland, and seeing the lagoon where the icebergs, where the glacier had broken away and created these kind of icebergs in the lagoon, and then they slowly break away too and drift out to sea, and then get washed back up onto the volcanic shoreline. And I was really kind of moved by the fact that, you know, it's such a beautiful sight. It's so incredible, but at the same time, it's really sad. This ice isn't reforming. And I was also kind of really intrigued by how people interacted with the ice at this site as well. You have people kind of walking, standing on the big lumps of ice in the water, taking selfies, and I was kind of intrigued by the way that we as humans are kind of almost unable to perceive the scale of climate change, or to kind of it's right there in front of us, but we're kind of so busy taking pictures of ourselves in front of our own demise. I became increasingly quite interested in that and our relationship to it as a material. And so when I got back from this research trip to the Royal College into my second year, I wanted to make a work that kind of almost like both celebrated the power of ice as a material, and but also kind of represents the way that our vision is almost a bit obscured when it comes to these massive issues that we're kind of unable to kind of grasp the severity or the scale of. So this work was a glass cast that I did at the Royal College in my second year. It's the first time I've done any glass casting, so it was a really good chance to get into the workshop and learn a new skill. And it was it's a hand produced cast, but the initial mold was made using computer like CNC, so computer milling. So I learned the CAD software and learned how, I was thinking about how to simulate ice or water in a digital space, and then thinking about how then that could then be brought into different molding processes, so silicon and then wax, and then the casing for the glass, and then it got then I cast it into glass. So kind of again harking back to the selfies on the beach and our relationship to technology being brought in there as well, and thinking about the intersection between the handmade and the technological, and also again back into our experience of both the natural world, but also how technology affects that in both positive and negative ways. And then another project I did whilst I was at the Royal College was I was lucky enough to go to the Palais de Tokyo and spend a week making work in one of their spaces at the bottom of the gallery as part of the Thomas Saraceno Aeroscene project, with a group of other creatives from Royal College, and that project's all about air and the importance of air, the politicization of air, the use of air within urban space. And so I kind of decided to create a projection work that basically took the viewer, but also represented my own journey through the elements. So it started off with it kind of started off with light, which is where I started, I guess, in my journey through the elements. And this is actually video footage from the same ceiling at the Royal College with the fluorescent lights. And then it went through to water, which was my next element, and then ended up with air at the end. So this is some of the shots of water. And I don't think I've got air. And then finally, just before we go into the last making, and then now I'm back at the Royal College. It's just before degree show, and this was a point where I think one of the tutors said to me that my work was still really similar to where I'd come in, which was probably the most useful thing in some ways anyone's ever said, in terms of just like, I just really didn't want to leave my MA with the same work as I'd come in. I liked my work, but I really wanted to use my MA as a chance to have explored something different. And then another tutor said, as I said before, that I should use up all the materials in my space and just be playful. And so I started this process of kind of using everything up and just being quite playful. And this is where I guess where I'm at now really with my work is I'm using all these different aspects of different processes from my own work within each work. So this part is it's a photograph of a building initially, and then I've taken it into the computer and kind of tried to go in as far as possible into the pixels, into that kind of grid that we navigate within within digital space. And then from that, I've printed it out and then used it as the acetate to expose onto a screen, to then screen print from. And then once I finish with the acetate, I then bring that into sculptural works. There's also bits of 3D prints in here, bits of like, this is like a stick from the casting room that I was using to mix up silicone for casting. So I guess these works start to represent all the different creative processes and the intersections between them, and the kind of, as I said earlier, the like way that we can adapt as humans and quite intuitively construct with the materials around us. So these are from my final show. They're all works from my final kind of body of work that I made for my degree show. And I guess I was taking I felt like I was taking a lot of risk at this point, because this is kind of coming up to Easter, just before the final show, which was kind of in early June. And I was kind of really working with quite new processes and new materials in lots of ways. But the kind of materials they are, the paper and the acetate and the tape, is, as I said earlier, it's quite easy to reconfigure things. So if things don't work out, you kind of I just cut them up and start again. Or the kind of hardest thing, I guess, is knowing when to stop with the process and not kind of overdoing it too much. And with these works, this is the point where plants began to kind of really creep into the work. I wanted to have these points where the natural was really kind of jarring against the more geometric use of print. And yeah, this has kind of increased more and more recently, but yeah, these I kind of wanted these to almost be like these urban trees as well. And yeah, and experimenting with things like balance as well, and things being kind of, again, like the early works from the degree show at Glasgow, things being kind of slightly precarious. So this is just balance. There isn't any fixing, and this kind of just keeps it all in place. And then more and more, I'd been using tape a lot, but more and more I started using packaging. again, just to kind of, it was another material that was in my space, and I really like there not being a hierarchy in materials. Like bubble wrap is just as important as bronze in so many ways, and I'm again interested in this kind of intuitive way that we wrap things and we protect things and we try to put value on things. So increasingly I've used like things like fragile tape as well for that reason, to kind of start thinking about ideas of fragility in our climate, or fragility in our kind of structures within the world, like the way that we send things around the world with this kind of globalized world within capitalism, kind of starting to ask questions about that. So yeah, bubble wrap both as an idea of protecting something fragile, but also the way that we package things and we kind of transport things around the world. So yeah, I started to make these works that were using bubble wrap and spray paint and quite simple kind of hanging mechanisms or structural elements to it as well. And then this kind of gives a sense of the final show of the works together, and I wanted to kind of position them in a way where people again kind of had to move through the space and interact with them in different eye levels, and kind of at points you would see other works through the layers within each sculpture. And that brings us on to the final workshop. So during lockdown, I haven't been able to get to my studio, so I've been kind of using similar ideas as what I was doing at for the degree show in Glasgow, but increasingly using cardboard. So creating these sculptures at home using cardboard and tape, and my prints and my photographs, and then starting to think about how the collages might relate to the sculpture. So they kind of become maquettes for future installations, where you can start to get a sense of what the space might be like in a way where the 2D and the 3D might kind of collide in one work. And then I was also, so I've been using all the packaging that I've been getting for deliveries, and I got quite a lot at one point. So I got a new table delivered. So I just wanted to kind of scale up and think about how I could make a work that again had this human height and started to interact with the architecture around, and also that frames the world around through these kind of viewpoints. So that's what we're just going to have a quick go at, just as the last, stop the screen share, just as the last kind of 10 minutes before we do, or maybe we can do questions during that. I don't know what you think. But yeah, I can kind of talk through the sculpture quickly, and maybe we could do some questions at the same time. So no, we're running out of time. Okay, I'm gonna talk through a sculpture. So yeah, just all you need is packaging. Can be I have been playing around with a little bit with the kind of having elements that are obviously from kind of global. I try to avoid Amazon, but occasionally it does happen, and like kind of sometimes including bits of like the barcode or the packaging, but quite often I'll avoid that and I'll just kind of go with bits of kind of blank card, or sometimes when it comes and it's got the one colour on one side and another on another. That's quite useful. Just going to put the prints back down. So we've got my prints from earlier, so I could include some of those. They're kind of dry already. But it's quite simple. It's just kind of a case of a bit like the collage, like starting to think about what shapes you want to create, and starting to kind of stick the panels together really, and then think about the way in which they can begin to kind of build up structurally. So yeah, the kind of, again, it's about thinking about which materials to use, like what to use on what pieces. I usually make a few, and then once I've got a few, I begin to kind of piece them together. And yeah, start to kind of create the slots. This is where having the coloured tape that becomes really useful. So you can either slot just as like to create one slot, that works, or it also works as like a double one. So yeah, kind of starting to build it up, and then I don't know, coloured tape wise, I usually start to kind of put bits on as well. Let me get a bit of print in there. And then yeah, as it kind of grows, sometimes there's structural issues, so I have to go back and kind of reinforce parts of it. But it's quite easy to do that with the tape. And yeah, you can shape. You know, I'm doing mine fairly geometrically, but you can kind of begin to add in extra. Yeah, Bill. Extra kind of yeah, shapes within, and start to see how things might begin to grow structurally, really. And again, if it doesn't look right or if it doesn't work, it's just a case of reconfiguring it. Into and like with the collage, it's just a case of either starting to think about the composition first. So sometimes I'll think about the composition flat before beginning to build it, or starting to kind of decide which prints or which images work together first flat and then building it up, but also increasingly kind of like just to kind of build it as it's going along, really. Start to play with balance and slotting and kind of, yeah, developing it that way. So yeah, either with tape or with the glue. It's pretty simple. And so yes, we've got a monoprint from home. This was a part of the screen print from when I was able to access the screen print workshop before in between lockdowns. So that's another thing for anyone graduating, like there's these really great open access sculpture workshops or screen print workshops around the country now. So they're really great places to be able to access facilities without having to kind of have all the initial setup costs. So yeah, so this was a screen print from there, and then this is a photograph. So it's starting to kind of build it up using quite a lot of processes. Don't know if I think I'm going to put one of the prints in from earlier as well. Then I'm using slightly different tape to the ones I usually use kind of more like carpet tape or gaffer tape in the sculptures, but this is kind of more like a fabric tape, but any tape works really. Just going to slot this on. Give a bit of an idea. Yeah, we'll just kind of maybe leave it there and go to questions, but just to give a little idea of that process, and obviously can then build it up and yeah, with more time add more facets and more layers and start to bring in some of the transparencies. But that, yeah, should give a bit of an idea of that process too. Cool. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat, but I know we said we'd leave a bit of time at the end for questions. So, any questions, Matt?
Hi, Susie.
Hello. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That was really great, really interesting journey, really interesting way of demonstrating. We have got a question, but I'd like to also say to all the other guests, if you do have a question, hover over the top left and type in a question and we will read those out. In the meantime, while we're just waiting for questions to come on, I think that's great. And I also want to highlight your idea of crafternoons, which I think, and I truly believe, is a word that you invented. And I think it's so good. I think that's something that post-pandemic should definitely continue in terms of creating a collective unity and creativeness with people that maybe can't meet up at the time. And it's just so good for people to be creative together. So I think that's really good. So while we're waiting for people to type in questions, I have got one question already from Hannah, and she's curious as to why you had a gap between your BA and MA, why you chose to do your MA at the time that you did.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, I think it's really personally, I think it's really important to have a little bit of a gap. Not necessarily. I had seven years, which I guess is quite a long time, but it allowed me to get an insight into what it's like to be working as an artist. It allowed me to get teaching experience, which has been really invaluable in terms of being able to help to support the studio, and as a kind of obviously I'm then able to, I kind of prefer to support myself through my teaching alongside the art so that I can then do the projects I want to do rather than having to do specific projects because they make more money, or kind of having the financial kind of security dictate the artwork. And I also love teaching. It's like a really big part of what I do and feeds into my own research and my own practice. So having those 7 years allowed me to build up the teaching experience. It basically allowed me to fund my master's. I saved up a year's worth of the fees. and I moved to London before my MA, so I was in London for 2 years before, so I got used to living in London before then doing a pretty intensive master's, and it's a full-time master's, but I was working as well because I had to be able to fund it. So I worked, I taught 1 day a week, and then I worked in the evenings and at weekends. So it allowed me the chance to basically do the MA. I think it also developed the work. I think if I'd gone straight away, I would have probably just repeated the same work as I had done in my final year. And it kind of was at the point where I felt like I needed a bit of an injection back into the work. I kind of knew there were things that I wanted to change about the work. And then on a kind of final practical level, it meant I think I got more from the actual MA. Like I kind of approached it from a way that I just wouldn't have done. Maybe other people would straight away, but I don't think I would. And it also meant that I took opportunities during my MA that ended up leading. So I did some at the Royal College. You can do bits of teaching. You can apply to do bits of teaching in different institutions, like as experience, as work experience. And I applied to a number of different institutions and got quite a few of the opportunities. And one of them is where I now work as a lecturer. They offered me, on the back of me doing a day's teaching for them through the Royal College, they offered me some more work as a visiting lecturer, and then offered me work as an associate lecturer, and I'm now working there as a lecturer. So I don't think I would have got those experiences if I hadn't had already got the other teaching experience. So I think as a kind of whole, it kind of, it helped the work. It helped me as a person to be able to be as kind of, I think it's really important that when you're doing an MA, you're also able to look like kind of sustain, and it's really intense. It's a really intense period of time, and I just don't think I would have been as kind of happy and as got as much out of the Royal College if I'd been getting used to London or struggling even more to make ends meet financially to be there. So I think it was a really good time, both in terms of the work for the work, but also for me as a person to be there at that time.
Thank you, Susie. Gillian said she was going to ask, are you managing to make a living as a sculptor? But then she's also followed up saying, thank you so much. You've answered the question within that. Rob has asked, which artists have inspired you and why?
That's a really good question. I guess that's kind of changed a bit as well when my style changed quite a lot at the Royal College. So maybe earlier on I was probably more heavily influenced by architects actually, but artist wise, earlier on with my more kind of geometric work, people like Sol Lewitt, Richard Serra, Oliver Ellison as well. And then at the Royal College, when the style changed, I kind of, I realised that I needed to actually be inspired by more female artists. I think it's really important as a female sculptor to be a kind of advocate for other female artists and kind of, make sure that you're being inspired by people from different places and different genders, different cultures, different disciplines. So I got really inspired by Isa Genskin, her work, and Phila de Barlow as well, Franz West a little bit too, but then also kind of increasingly more by other not sculptors, by painters, by printmakers, and peer group. I think the best inspiration is from your direct peers, actually, from the people that you're going to shows with or doing shows with, kind of working with. I think that's kind of increasingly been my realization, that it's great to be inspired by these famous artists that, you know, you probably will never meet or aren't alive anymore, you know, but actually the peers around you and your friends and the people making work at the same time alongside you are really inspiration. So one of my colleagues, Olivia Bax, my colleagues from University of Gloucestershire, she's really inspirational with her work as well. And yeah, it's quite a lot. Kind of try and get inspiration from lots of different places really now.
Brilliant, thank you. So Liz has a question. Do you have any advice for students who are trying to make work from home and working solo outside of a studio, but more importantly, I guess, without feedback from the studio environment, she says?
Yeah, my advice would be there's never really a reason to not have feedback from the studio environment. I know that online settings mean you don't get that kind of day-to-day someone passing your work and kind of giving comments, but I think with a little bit of kind of work, you can kind of construct similar things to that. So that's why the crafternoons or the work together afternoons are really good if you are working together online, and you can all be kind of working on your own thing, but you can stop for a tea break and have a chat about each other's work. I think online crits work really well. I've been part of 2 different online crit groups over lockdown. One I set up, and then one that was existing already online, in person, and then moved online during lockdown. And actually, the online format for a crit can be really beneficial. Yeah, so finding ways to continue to be engaged and to keep that peer group and keep those connections in the network going, I think is really important. And then in terms of the actual making, yes, sourcing materials as easily as possible. Obviously it's hard when we can't get out to art stores and things, but using materials around the house or materials that are coming in through deliveries like we've done today, or being, I know we're all on the screen all the time, but being inventive about the use of digital processes that can be done from home as well. But yeah, I think the more engaged we can be as communities during this time, the easier it is for everyone. And I know for me, being part of creative communities, that and my houseplants have kind of kept me going during lockdown. So yeah, finding ways to stay connected, whether it's through the crafternoons or conversations or a coffee group, or just a regular check-in with your peers once a week, where you say, okay, every Friday let's make an online group, and we'll just meet for an hour and everyone can just talk about what they've been up to during the week and any problems, or ask for some advice or some feedback about a piece of work. And it's not, as I say, it's not quite the same as in the studio, but I think it can work really well.
Yeah, I think that's really important and valuable to remember, that although it's called social distancing, it's physical distancing, but we can still remain connected and find a way to balance screen time while staying in touch and collaborating. I've got another follow-up question from Liz. She's asking, where do you buy your tape?
So just before lockdown, the first lockdown, it was like 2 weeks before. It was before everything shut, but I was kind of like, oh, this is happening now, and it was, you know, when everyone was getting a bit nervous. I just went to the local art store and walked there and just like stocked up on loads and loads of tape. That lasted me until about Christmas this year. I got quite a lot. And then I just bought this. I think I couldn't get some from the art store that I'd used in London this time around, so I just got this online from I think it's from Hobbycraft actually. This is like, yeah, just a couple of pounds a roll. they do all the colours. I know Amazon also do them, but I don't really want to promote Amazon too much. So go to Hobbycraft, it's great.
There we go, Liz. We know where you're going to be going once non-essential retail opens up again.
No, but you can order it online. It's all about the online ordering.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, very wise. Okay, let me just check the other questions. So I've got another question. It says it's anonymous, but lighting. Do you approach lighting engineers / companies directly? I'm interested in making things move, and your trigger action for your outdoor work of making 4 pieces move around as a ball interests me. And in brackets, like to see a video of it in action. Is it hard to build circuits or whatever to get these sort of things made? Should I go on an electrical lighting course? Adult education sculpture classes tend to ignore these things and lean towards things on plinths mainly. It's an interesting one.
Okay. Yeah, sorry I didn't show a video. I have got videos on my website, but I just always find in a talk they quite often don't work, etc. So yeah, have a look at my website for the videos. Yeah, I do think it's always really good to approach places directly, but I think it's good to approach places directly with some knowledge previously. So kind of making sure that you're doing that research beforehand, so you're not going with all these questions that you could easily kind of have found out with a few internet searches. So you know, I don't think they would expect you to know everything, but just to go with a bit of an informed idea of things. So I guess a good example of it is that I don't make all my own neon. I tried it and realized it's one of those skills where people who make neon, that's their skill, they do that day in, day out. But I learned enough to know now when I get neon made how to do it and the process. So I then go to a neon maker and I ask the things and I talk about things, and I'm not kind of asking things that aren't possible. And the same with the coding of things. So I'm really lucky. So I've collaborated with Sue Shepherd, who on a couple of pieces, so on the reflect piece and on the spinning rotate one, collaborated with her, and she's got years and years and years of experience working with neon. So she was like instrumental in that project, both those projects, and I can't thank her enough, really. But with that project in particular, with the rotating one, we worked with a company actually in America for the coding, because they're kind of the specialists in making neon animated and kind of having coding within neon lighting. It would be very different if it was an LED piece. We might work somewhere differently, but we ended up working with a company in America called Tech 22. They've been working with neon for years and years and years. They everything's done by email. They don't have phone conversations, which is kind of unusual. And they basically ask you what you want for your neon to do. We had to come up with animations and spreadsheets to say what we wanted timings to do, what, when, and which light. And then they sent us the coding box. So the coding was done for us through them and sent us the wiring diagram, and then we wired up the electronics from that diagram. So it was very much I see it very much like a collaboration between myself and Sue, but very much also in collaboration with the tech company. So yeah, I guess it's about doing the research, finding the right place, speaking to them, and going and being open, being like, saying, I'm really new to this. I'm sorry if some of my questions might seem like inexperienced, but I really want to get experience, and this is what I want to do. Would you be able to help? And kind of starting that building that relationship, and starting that conversation, but showing that you've done some of the work and the research beforehand, so that when you go to these people who are experts in their field, you're kind of going with an awareness that they are experts in their field, and also a kind of awareness that you've like explaining you've done the research, but awareness that you might not, there might be kind of gaps in your knowledge. So I think that's usually a way. In terms of learning an electronic course, yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it all the time and you really want to develop it, then yeah, probably. But maybe initially there's ways around it by working with a company directly or trying to get work experience. And I think I'd only do a course if you know you're going to really want to invest in that process all the time. Like if you just want to do it from time to time, then maybe it's better to work directly with a company that does it all the time. So I think it's really about knowing when to be really hands-on with things and when to get things outsourced. I'm really hands-on with welding most of the time, but from time to time I'll outsource it, except if I'm really busy with work or if it's got to be a structural thing. So it's kind of it's learning when and when not to be really hands-on, I guess. Hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent. Just got a question from Rob. He's asking, how do you manage your art practice alongside your lecturing?
Yeah, so I lecture 2 days a week, and then I do little bits of tutoring here and there alongside that. So that leaves me with 3 days a week in the studio, which I think is a really good balance. It probably, maybe, or sometimes it swings the other way. Sometimes it's more like 3 days a week and teaching 2 days a week in the studio, but just making sure where possible to try to keep those studio days as studio days and not having other things creeping into them, because it's always really easy to open your laptop and have other things keep creeping in. So compartmentalizing as much as possible, really, I think that's really important. Yeah, and just being like organized and working quite a lot of time. Like, it kind of doesn't feel like work sometimes, so I'll kind of do bits of things here and there at maybe what some people would probably think would be quite unsociable hours, but if it means I then get more time in the studio, I'm happy to do that. But it's all sometimes definitely spinning plates sometimes feels a bit like that, but I think in a really exciting way. And I like to be busy. I like to feel like I'm making progress with my own work, and also with teaching, you always see that it's so rewarding because you see what you're doing in your job having an effect on someone else's life. So I kind of always feel like I've got energy for that, really.
Thank you so much. Cool. I think that's all the questions. So just to let you know, a date for your diaries: on Wednesday, the 24th of March, we're going to have Matthew Burrows, who set up the Artist Support Pledge. For any details, you just go to the events page of Morley. He'll be talking about alternative economies in response to the Artist Support Pledge and the way artists can support each other and entrepreneurial skills. But all I've got to say is thank you so much, Susie. That was amazing. I can just about imagine that there is a virtual round of applause happening right about now. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you have been very inspired to make stuff and